pressing the button. Okay.
All right. Are we live?
We are indeed.
Okay. Yes, I'm alive. Here we are, chapter 11. It is the role of paganism in Christianity. I forget the exact title as I speak it, but
Christianity and Pagan Wisdom, yeah.
in pagan wisdom, yes. And we see, as we sort of thematically dealt with last time, we see that there are a couple of different things going on. There is the inevitable influence of the confluence of the two streams coming out of the ancient world, say, or even pre-ancient world, where there's this sort of Zoroastrian stream of worldly knowledge, and there's this that sort of results in a kind of Aristotelianism in modern day, right up into Gandhi Shapur and Mohammedism, and in the church specifically results in a kind of one-sided teleology, and then and on the other side we have the mystery schools and the sort of Mosaic tradition and the tradition of this sort of run through the Neoplatonic position, run through the Platonic experience of the mystery schools into the Neoplatonic influence in the church, and so and in society. I mean, I don't think this is all of this influence in coming out of this confluence in the being of Christ, alive after the resurrection, in its influence in the world now. I don't think it's reducible to the church, to Christianity. It's also symptomatic, or better put, it could be symptomatically understood that science is the Aristotelian natural science, as it evolved, came out of this Zoroastrian stream through Aristotelianism, and that the sort of humanities, if you will, and the sort of political ideologies came out of the Platonic stream, right through Hegel, say.
Yeah. The pagans,
and so this is where we're landing in this chapter. And I was reading this morning again, and I'm as I reflect on it, I realize there's not that much to this book. It's really just an establishing of the fact that there are spiritual realities going on underneath the historical realities, and that there is and that people are able to delve into the deep wisdoms of the universal and eternal realities while living as living souls in a temporal plane, sort of absorbing that incarnative process of that spirit, of which Christianity is the not the personification, but also the instantiation of sort of final participation in Owen Barfield's sense of the word.
Yeah.
So that is, I promised I would ramble, and there it is.
Nice ramble, thank you.
That's an introduction.
Want to come back to your point about there's not much to this book. From one perspective, it's actually a really simple idea. And you can sum it up in Christianity as mystical fact. The trouble is our thinking, that's so shaped by modern thinking, is really incapable of understanding what that actually really means. So even though there's one thread running through this book, and we keep bumping up against it, and your friend, I think he is, Alex, it's like he still doesn't get what mystical fact is. And I have a certain understanding about why that is, but it's back here, so like in this chapter, so like it's bang in your face again. And one of the important things that I think Steiner does is to help us begin to appreciate this hugely profound idea is he does loads of name dropping. And he says, basically, he's saying, go read Plato, go read Aristotle, go read all the other Heraclitus who we looked at, go read Heraclitus, go read Philo of Alexandria. And we're going to come back to him big time today because he's like particularly important in this context. Go read Plotinus. And when you get to experience what is living there, what is sort of like at the core of their worldview, then you know what mystical fact is. And you can't, it's not like a propositional piece of knowledge that you say, it's like this equals that and this equals that, and you think you've understood it. No. It doesn't work like that. And this sense, I think this is what you and I are trying to achieve with our conversations. By entering into a conversation about it, we bring up these different threads. Sometimes we do a good job of it, sometimes we could do a lot better, but it is raising to conscious awareness that's like there's this completely different way of looking at life and the whole phenomena of existence, and that if a person is prepared to walk down that path, then this simple term mystical fact becomes this transformative experience, which is what I had in Mini, because I didn't do the thorough reading, but when I first read it 20 years ago, there was this, shit, this is powerful. I didn't understand the magic that he had weaved in there to create that effect, but thanks to talking with you, doing my own reading, I now begin to really understand the firm foundations on which this pagan wisdom, which is intimately related to an understanding of what Christ is that goes beyond what we've known in the past. So if I simplified thinking, it's like medieval conception of what Christ is, how the concept of what Christ is actually grows through linking it back to pagan wisdoms, or mystery school knowledge is another term that we've used here. And for me, in this chapter, one guy that's particularly interesting is Philo, Philo of Alexandria, who we did look at in a bit more detail a few episodes ago, when Steiner describes how his way of understanding what the Bible is this is a description of what the soul will go through on its way to finding Christ. So when when Philo reads about the children of Israel being taken into exile, that is, we as individuals, or Philo as an individual says, it's where do I recognize, how is that related to my own intimate story? When we were in Egypt, when the Jews were in Egypt and then they left Egypt, that is a parting with the old ways, with the comforts of Egyptian life, with the luxury of the whole Egyptian civilization, and putting itself through 40 years of living in hardship in the desert, and him linking that to, I have to disconnect from this life driven by outward impressions, and going through the desert. So in mysticism, it might be called the long dark night of the soul, and there are loads of other names that you can give to it. But this separation from not a complete separation, but an ability to stand aside from the world so that you're able to gain a new perspective, a more complete perspective of where you are in life. So you're in the desert, and then you get to the promised land, and you get you have to blow down Jericho's walls, and there are these interior barriers that are in us, and then finally the Jewish establish themselves in Israel, and then Christ, and then you have this promise of the birth of Christ, the promise of the birth of the Messiah, and then you have the birth of the Messiah, the Christ awakening in us. Where? On the place of the skull, Golgotha, in here. It's through thinking. And this is such a powerful way for helping people to understand how you have to go beyond a literal interpretation of the Bible and biblical criticism, how it's about owning the content and understanding the journey that was made there is the same journey that I have to make if I am going to find the Christ. And I think he does that in something in a beautiful way, the way Steiner describes that here.
Well, I think you just described it even more beautifully. That is, it's funny because this story that you're telling, like the Exodus story, is being engaged with now in our not just that story, but the story of the religio is being seriously engaged with now by people adjacent to us in this online sphere of long form conversation and exploration. And it's really interesting because people are leveling up to it. There are people who are converting to Christianity who were dyed in the wool natural science worldviewists, right? Radically strong secularists in that sense. And I think what they've come to is some you mentioned early in that beautiful description of the problem of merely propositional knowledge or propositional knowing. And I see people casting about, like our friend Brendan, in a way that is only really allowing for either we have a devotional spiritual experience that is of a soul nature that one can understand why you would ritualize that into a religious life, but it needs to move beyond the pre-modern and all of these axial age presumptions, say something like that we touched upon before. And then on the other hand, there's the critical historical documentation and anthropology and paleontology and geology, and we've got all of this. We can look into this. World from these two perspectives, and we can see that pragmatically, instrumentally, that the devotional is very important, but we don't have to take in all of this spiritual stuff, But we can call it spirituality because it gives us a nice feeling of renewal or something like that we touched upon with Jonathan Rowson when we looked at his work with conversation with Brendan. And the breaking through this now is this guy Jordan Hall, and for me is really powerful in a really powerful way contemporarily. Like there's something in the air right now, and it has to do with the end of the not the end of necessarily historically, and historical is one thing we need to come back to, but not the end historically, but the logical, soulful, fruitful end of propositional gruel, essentially thin propositional gruel, put more and more in more and more complicated ways in order to prop up this modern project, right? And call it meta modern, and it's not moving beyond modernity. For one thing, it doesn't understand how modernity arose, what modernity itself is nested in, this continuity, this confluence that we were talking about to begin here. So I think that your description is wonderful of this reading. Like Jordan Peterson's been doing these sort of seminars on the Old Testament story, starting from Genesis, but moving into to Exodus particularly, and there's a psychological reading there, and I noted in a comment that Brendan made on his recent sort of argumentation for a historical analysis, critical analysis of the text. I noticed that one of the things he basically said is that we are retroactively projecting our merely subjective soul states back into these people's minds, and it turns out to me that it's an inversion of that. Right? These are mythopoetic pictures that are becoming more and more necessarily historically accurate in a certain sense. Right? They're mythopoetic. They're mythic. This is mythos. The Bible is a myth. It's mythology, and it's also the evolution of consciousness into which that mythology is engaging with the world outside, in the immanence of the spiritual nature of the world outside, so that the history and the spiritual stream that the initiates were tapping into as a soul experience only also are meeting resonantly the world outside as a spiritual reality itself. And so in this chapter he goes from Philo into Plotinus, and Plotinus starts to talk about the basically seeing the soul spiritual in the world outside, not just this internal internal spiritual navel gazing kind of.
It's micro macro, isn't it? That's we are the whole.
Yes, and then in this chapter he goes into John and essentially says these two things are real. Both of these two things are reality, and John brings them together, right? In the beginning, in the beginning, and then really what's bringing them together is the reality, the historical reality of Jesus of Nazareth, inspirited by a cosmic being, overcoming the not overcoming necessarily, incarnating into a new Genesis moment, right? For history, but also for the way in which our souls are evolving in order for us to do the same, something like that.
Shit, you've said so many interesting things. I don't know where to go. I'm going to start here because this was the first thought I was having whilst you were talking about the importance of this deepening of the soul experience. And experience is a word that I want to come back to because we've had reflections on it before as well. But I think it's good to get it into this conversation as well. But just like stepping outside this whole Christianity as mystical fact. And so one of our other favourite books, obviously, is The Philosophy of Freedom. And what does Steiner say? It's like at the beginning of the book, if you follow this book, it's like, I'm going to lead you to a place in your soul where you will always experience freedom. It's not, it is this, and it's experience. It's not, I'm going to convince you. It is, you are going to create this own state, way of being in your soul, your own, it's like your way of looking at life and your own experience of life. It's like, and that's going to be so rooted, you're going to become conscious of how that lives in you and becomes this eternal stream of life. It's the bread of life, or the water of life. And he really insists on this. This isn't dogma. This is when you start the process, an honest process of self-discovery. This is where you get to when you look deep inside. Because I think it's here that Steiner at the beginning of this chapter, he says, these ideas are directly reminiscent of Pythagorean thought. The center of existence is sought in the inner life. And this is why experience and mysticism or mystery schools are so important, because it's having an experience of this other. It's not just an abstract. And I was listening to a guy talking about his name is Neil Grossman, and he did a book on Spinoza called The Spirit of Spinoza, I believe it was called. And he was interviewed by Mishlove. Is it Jeremy Mishlove of yeah. And it was a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it. But at one point, he describes his journey. How he was originally he was a physicist, and he read one day that Einstein had said, so like, if there's a God, it's a Spinozan God. And this Neil Grossman, he's like, this is interesting. I'll look into it. And because he had tenure and so like he had a certain amount of freedom, he was doing all of his like research on physics and quantum physics. He was also fascinated by the fact that many of the prominent scientists that developed like quantum mechanics or quantum field theory, they were also deeply fascinated by mysticism, often well read in the Bhagavad Gita, Advaita Vedanta, and usually less so in Christian mysticism, but there was a profound appreciation of this type of literature. Anyway, so he says he was like a stereotypical physicist of that day. So like, no, that's woo woo. It's like I can't do it. But he was very intrigued by Einstein saying, Spinoza's God. If I believe it, it's like Spinoza. And he was trying to explain how. Now, I'm going to link this to the word experience here. He said one day he came across the book by Raymond Moody, Life After Lives or Life Beyond Lives. He was the guy who started documenting near-death experiences, people who had left their body. Anyway, Raymond Moody, he was asked one day, it's like, do you believe what these people are telling you on these near-death experience, that they've left their body and they've had these other experiences? He says, yeah, I do believe these people. But what's more important is that these other people, they've actually experienced it. They've actually experienced their immortality. And when you listen to their descriptions, you can hear this experience talking through their stories. But we've got something else also going on very interesting in this chapter here, because if you look carefully at Spinoza, and I'm not going to go into too many details here, but once you start scraping away at the surface, you find out there are a lot of what was it that Einstein might have been so interested in is I'm going to remind you of something that you said before we went on air, and then link it back to this story. So you said this. What was the name of the guy that had the Jonathan Hall, was it, or John Hall?
Jordan Hall.
Jordan Hall.
Conversion.
Jordan Hall said that if Jews or Muslims could accept the Trinity, then they would. How did you phrase it? Can you remember how you said it?
Yeah, that the question was, essentially, isn't this Neoplatonic, the Trinity? Like, isn't it just Plato warmed over and just borrowed by Christianity? And how do you accept the Trinity? And he was, how do you differentiate Christianity from other religions? And why would you?
Well, the universality of it, wasn't it?
Yes, and the moral presumption, of course, is that you must be pluralistic, and one can respect all the religions without being pluralistic. One can see them confluencing into one way of one spiritual reality flowing into the world now. One could see it that way, and it's plausible. So he says, Jordan says, well, if we took Judaism or Islam, for that matter, Islamicism, and we put the Trinity inside those religious uh, structures,
Yeah.
you would have Christianity.
Okay, now I
So
can link
it was
back
a
to.
way to
Oh, sorry.
say, yes, yeah, it was a way to say, here's the evolution of this process. This is what it's evolved into. And one could argue, by the way, that Mohammedanism came after Christianity, but um, that doesn't really mean anything in the spiritual evolution of things. It's not, because one doesn't just fall out of the other. It's a reciprocal determining, which all of nature is doing all the time. Why would our spiritual life be any different than the rest of nature? It's not. That's the whole point here.
Okay, before I make the point that I wanted to say, it's like someone like Philo would say, that's interesting what you said there, Jeff, because so if we look at Islam, where does it come from? It comes from Esau. It's like the brother of Jacob, and so this is an outgrowth of like part of it's like the original Mosaic. What can we call it? Impulse, if you like, but it's quite clearly of a different character. But anyway, it was leaving Philo aside. So this point about recognizing the Trinity in there. So Spinoza becomes super interesting because he is. If you do a superficial search, he's a Jew, okay. But when you actually start reading his stuff, then what he says about Christ makes you say, and I can give a couple of examples in a second. You start going, well, if this is a Jew, then what's a Christian? Because he's essentially arriving at like the same conception of what Christ is as what Christians actually say he is. And let's see. I'll just get. This is I found a research paper called Spinoza's Christology, and I'll just read some of the snippets that I picked out that are so interesting. So Spinoza does not think that human salvation is determined by abstract knowledge, including knowledge from reason and reasoning. Not only is Christ ontologically distinct from people, including prophets, Christ is in them as others are not. This is coming from a Jew, okay, or coming from Spinoza. Spinoza writes, Christ taught things as eternal truths and did not prescribe them as laws. Christ did not prescribe, he inscribed. In this, Spinoza says, he freed them from bondage to the law. Okay, just one more because there are loads. Let's see, where can we... This is... according to Spinoza, and this is all referenced, there's a piece called... It's like the really interesting work is... It's something he wrote in 1660 called the Theological Political Treatise. This is like where this is all coming from. But it's that third quote. According to Spinoza, Christ was not so much a prophet as the mouth of God. Said Spinoza about the prophets, they did not know God's existence as an eternal truth. They had to perceive it as a law. And I could go on and on and on and on with this. But what the picture that Spinoza is coming to is that's like everything, and not, we've got to emphasize here, we don't just mean the visible, the sensible, as in perceivable by the senses universe. We mean absolutely, according to Spinoza, absolutely everything is within God. And he's there's this Neil Grossman that I talked about a few minutes ago. He says, and Max Leaf will love this because it's one of the metaphors that he uses. He says, let's try to create a picture that to demonstrate to us, it's like what type of relationship is. It's just, let's take a single cell, which is part of our bodies. We've got, I don't know how many trillions of cells we've got in our bodies, but every single cell got its life. It's not conscious of itself, but let's give it consciousness because we're playing a game and we're allowed to do that. And it could look at itself. It's like bumping up against all of these cells. And it has no ideas that all of these cells are part of a body. It's just focused on its own existence. But if it turned inside this single cell to look at the DNA in its own being, it would have a map of the whole body, knowledge of the whole body. So down at the micro, at the smallest levels almost of existence, we've got this same metaphor going on, that we can begin to understand how we go inwards to understand our relationship to the whole. And this type of thinking is it's absolutely everywhere throughout Spinoza. It's breathtaking, and I've only just started scratching the surface. There's this other beautiful quote. I'm looking to see if I can find it. Let me read you this one. This is from Spinoza. This is absolutely beautiful. No, I'm gonna. Let's see if I can find it. I do know. Okay, I'm gonna have to. I'll skip that and I'll paste it in the post. It's like in the notes afterwards. It's how the joy that he finds by contemplating this whole. So like looking at the DNA, and finding himself. But there's another hugely important angle here, is that if you read Goethe and what Steiner says about Goethe's relationship to Spinoza, so you could just read Goethe, but Steiner amplifies this. Spinoza's worldview is a little bit like the salvation for Goethe. It's like this archetypal thinking about, it's like everything is this metamorphosis that's we are all within God, is an essential part of Spinozism, which hugely influenced Goethe, his whole scientific method, his underlying philosophy. And then we also know how important Goethe was for helping Steiner to wake up to his own mission, specifically, but not limited to the philosophy of freedom and the redemption of thinking. Okay, and this is the bit that blew me away. That was all quite mind-blowing there. But I decided to see, has Steiner written anything about who Spinoza was a reincarnation of? Philo of Alexandria.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That is crazy. Is that from the Karmic Relationships lectures?
No,
series?
It was actually from. I think I've actually got it here. It was actually from. I think it might have been from 158. Let me just check that. Yeah, it was from 158, which isn't. So he's mentioned it in another context. And there's even more source to add to that, and that Fichte was the next incarnation of this same being. So when you begin to understand how central this Philo of Alexandria, Spinoza, Fichte, also is essentials in this whole stream that you and I are so passionate about. Here we're finding out these beautiful similar themes, isn't it? That's the Bible is a story that has to be experienced, and then the truth will sort of like it will grow in you, and then this idea is like then developed through Spinoza, and then to Fichte, his like unique way of seeing the world, and then it's like Steiner is able to take this, because I think this is for me it's like one of the it's like huge one of the beauties of life is I don't think reading Spinoza on his own, I don't think reading Goethe on his own, I don't think reading Fichte on his own, for me personally I'm talking about here, would ever have done it. It took the genius of Steiner to put them into a story. It's like connect the dots and then create this greater vision where you begin to understand how these people are like essential ingredients of humanity growing up, waking up to its own universal being that lives in every single one of us.
Yeah, man. I can see how that would have blown your mind, because you went to Spinoza intuitively to look at ethics and look at his conception of God, which was so influential. It's influential to people today. John Vervaeke's constantly going into a deep dive with Spinoza as he explains it, which is a sort of karmic thing in and of itself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I want to ask our friends, who sort of, who just need to hang on to this propositional approach, right? Who sort of bracket things like faith and experience and subjectivity as merely those things that are behaviorally informed by propositional approach. I want to ask them, let's say that karma and reincarnation is plausible, and I think we can make a plausible, and maybe we'll do that sometime, make a plausible argument for its existence in a weird occlusion of the whole idea of it in Western society for a blip in history, where in the rest of history it was basically understood to be the case, right? So let's just say it's plausible. If you do away with faith and subjectivity and the personal as merely isolative experiences, you can't get there,
Yeah.
right? You cannot get there. You can't have the Jordan Hall conversion, right? And I'm not saying Jordan Hall is understanding karma and reincarnation, but karma and
You've seen
reincarnation
something.
is part of what you're talking about. It's not just an accident that you brought it up. It's part of the Christian story. It's not part of the exoteric Christian story. In fact, it was eliminated on purpose, because if people saw this deep continuity that you're describing,
Yeah.
like holographic, archetypal, but also the cellular, biological, and we're looking at, they would be people would be unstoppable. You know what I mean? They would be uncontrollable in the sense of in the sense of self-governing, right? Rather than governed by these various structures that we think we cynically think we need to be governed by. So it's just it's a small opening, right? That is possible. Michael Levin's biology, work in biology, really points to this, right? If he's not working through with as Jordan Hall says, with a paradigmatic mind, he will let that biology speak in
Yeah.
a way that elevates the experience to a universal experience of that which is holographically microcosmic, right? And so this idea in interdisciplinary astronomy of the human gestalt that Steiner brings in at the beginning of that that amazing array of 18 lectures, that he brings in the human gestalt. What you would find if you could look at a cell and you could read it in the way that you're describing, you would see the whole human gestalt, which doesn't mean the whole physical body. It means you'd see the way in which that physical body comes into being, the way it's regenerating constantly, the way that Genesis is the story of now, not the story of the beginning of time, right? And what I love about one of the things Jordan Hall does in this conversation with Brendan is, Brendan is basically saying, yes, but what about science? What about the natural scientific? There's no way the resurrection could occur, basically. I mean, he's basically said that much to us, right? And 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 I understand that from a natural scientific paradigmatic point of view, it couldn't occur. But I mean, for what? But why would we let that impinge on another worldview that was not paradigmatically enchained, right? Yes, the exoteric Christian version is similarly chained because they're two sides of the same currency, right? They only speak of the bifurcation, and you brought up this term in relationship to all of this of metamorphosis, and I've come to this really in working with Witzigmann's structure phenomenology and coming off of Janio Schickler's work as with the fact of of resurrection. I've come off this understanding that metamorphosis is the archetype of archetypes, right? And so both of these perspectives are part of the same organism that is part of the same reality. Let's say the same form of reality that needs the polarity in metabolic resolution, say, so that it becomes part of you, becomes inherent to you, becomes immanent to you, or you come in touch with that which is immanent, and then the world opens up, and you see that this spiritual reality is immanent to all of nature.
You're saying something really interesting earlier. I want to go. There's like 2 points I'd like to make. Come back to Spinoza and the point you were making there. I think one of the other things that was been so interesting on this journey, and you've spoken about the same thing with Hegel before, is that if people knew, it would blow their minds, and society would be in a far healthier state than it is. So what do the forces have to do that don't want this type of evolution? They have to spread lies about it. We see it with Steiner and so like racism, so like the postmodernist crap that comes out there. It's like cherry picking. So like it's like a word here and a word here and a word here and saying that's racism. That's defamation. Okay, and it happens on other fronts as well, but also with Spinoza. So he will be misrepresented. I mean, if you look at if you look at the Wikipedia as and most scholars about this, he's a Jew. They don't even talk about the relationship he says he has to Christ. You have to go behind paywalls. Fortunately, as I study at university, so I can actually get to this stuff. But this stuff is behind paywalls where it's made manifestly obvious that Spinoza, he is nominally a Jew, but his whole character, his whole philosophy is Christian. And I know Steiner has talked about the same type of assassination or defamation that has to happen with people like Hegel. The empiricists, they have to, if you can't destroy an argument, it's like you make up lies about it, or you misrepresent it and you don't give it any coverage. And this is also something that we have to recognize, and this is part of with the book we're studying at the moment with Matt's group is like occult science. All of these things are only hidden because piles of shit have been put on top of them to stop us actually easily finding it. But once you do start asking questions and once you do start reading around with interest, and especially with other people, you discover these nuggets and you just go, oh my God. It really is these are nature's open secrets. but we've got so many turds floating around in the sea around us that we can't see like these beautiful like bloomings of like of human intellect and of human understanding that are there. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So that was one point that I wanted to. It's like I felt it was you stimulated me to like to emphasize that these are open secrets, and it only requires us like a critical mind to just like dig a little bit down, and you find them there, but you have to have an interest. There's another particularly how can I express this part of this chapter ages ago. This is beautiful. And it's where he's talking about it's where Plotinus, we're on to Plotinus now, and he's come to this experiential knowing of what Christ is, through his paganism, his pagan wisdom that he's retained thanks to like a continuation of mystery school knowledge. And he says, let's have a look. I'll read the whole one because it's just so beautiful, this bit. Many times it has happened, lifted out of the body into myself, becoming external to all other things and self-centered, beholding a marvelous beauty, then, more than ever, assured of community with the loftiest order, enacting the noblest life, acquiring identity with the divine, rooted within it, attaining the strength to set myself above the higher world, yet there comes a moment of descent from the spiritual vision to reasoning. And after that, reposing in God, I ask myself how it happens that I can now be descending, and how did my soul ever enter into my body? The soul, which, in its essence, is the high thing it has shown itself to be, and what can it be that has brought the souls to forget the Father God, and, though members of the divine and entirely of that world, to ignore at once themselves and it? This question, how is it possible that we've forgotten like our essential nature? He picks this up in other parts where he says it's like children, it's like growing up absent from their parents, and it's like having no knowledge of their parents, but a little bit of thought forces you to like, but I must have had a mother and a father, otherwise I would not exist here. And I found that bit so poignant there, because that's what specifically work with the philosophy of freedom, but also the work that we're doing here with Christianity as mystical fact. This question becomes more and more, because you enter. I'll own this. It's like every now and again, I enter into this state where it is this. How could I have ever forgotten what is so obvious and so essential? And then you're back in reality and you're walking your dog in the woods and you see how beautiful it is. But these moments of being completely drawn without yourself, a little bit like Plotinus describes there. You're outside, but you're being nourished by something else, and you think, how is it even possible that something of such soul-shattering importance, how can we have forgotten it? And of course, this is why we love Steiner, because it allows us to weave it into a context where that forgetting becomes meaningful, but also the reascent becomes don't want. I want. I was going to say the word. It becomes a necessity, but it becomes an obvious path for many people. That of course, I want to be able to return freely to that state with the power, the capacity that Christ gives me to do so.
Yeah, I think might be good for audience to understand that when we talk about soul, we're not talking about spirit, and we've talked about this before, but I just want to say as a reminder to then speak to what you were saying. Matt has a nice term. I don't know if he coined it or if it's Whitehead's term, but it's a descendentalism, so descending, entalism, right, rather than transcendentalism. And I would say not rather, right, because the transcendent is that which is eternal, right, and that eternal is descending into that which is temporal,
Yeah.
and that the eternal is the spirit. It's always generative, and the soul is that which we are participating in the in the well in making eternal, sort of fashioning it. It's and everywhere there's the spirit touches the soul becomes spirit, just to say. And this is Plotinus. It makes me want to go back and read more Plotinus. I did a certain duty of it some time ago, but this idea that that he was experiencing a an essential truth, right? That was an experience that then he witnessed falling out into something like propositional knowledge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so this speaks to faith, right? This speaks to what faith is.
Yeah.
And it is faith isn't a belief system, and it's not a blindness to reality. It's a touching of a reality before there's a linguistic description of that reality through the cognitive process and through propositional knowledge. The problem is, of course, we've gotten stuck in propositional knowledge, and we say we say, well, I'm not being propositional. I'm being scientific. But that whole project is propositional if it's based on epistemological presumptions of how knowledge comes about itself. And you have been on this, and I've been thinking about this while reading this chapter in the few weeks intervening on this notion of faith, right? And the importance of faith in science
Yeah. Absolutely.
is incredible, because you have to be working out of a hypothesis is an act of faith, and you don't have anything to study and inquire about or to bring about even without a continuity of faith through hypotheory, if you will,
Yeah.
in order to achieve that which it is that you're novelly trying to bring about, which is new knowledge on one hand, or it's actual matter on another, it's soul reconfiguration on another level. It's that deep continuity. So I just wanted to bring that into this what do you say, this the way in which our thinking structures, our concepts, our cognitive processes are a necessary descendental process that needs to occur, and it feels like death, because that's exactly what it is, and we have to do it. We have to run through that process, and then the propositional becomes the provisional, not propositional. It's a proposition made to not look through at the world, but to look at the process of bringing about a proposition in the first place, because that's the very act of generative spiritual reality that's occurring around us all the time. And so that's really interesting, because then Plotinus does this description of this descendental process that is torturous to him, like oh Lord, I'm forlorn.
Why did I do this?
Yes, why did I do this? Right? Why didn't I just stay up here in the spiritual? Right? And then he says, there's a sort of a matrix point, right? There's a fulcrum, say, and he passes over out of his own soul experience that Philo is describing into the a what I would say. And it's interesting. What made me think of this is because of Matt's scholarly relationship with Whitehead and how
Mm.
he brings Whitehead alive. And a lot of these folks who are trying to grapple with this religio, this experience that they're trying to shake themselves out of this natural scientific paradigmatic thinking, they're coming to Matt to say, what does Whitehead say? Because Whitehead is Plotinus, right?
Hmm.
He is he is looking at the way in which the soul of the world is an intentional, prehensile reality, which is vibrantly experienced as feeling. Now, I would say that it's not vibrantly that it's it's feeling all the way down, and it's feeling all the way up, and that our thinking is just an expression of feeling. But I would challenge that, because I think what Steiner brings in his spiritual science is that is a will impulse that gives rise to feeling, and that will impulse is imminently imbued with thinking, as not the cognitive process as in a descendental sense, but it's the originating faith.
Mm.
And I use this corny phrase that faith is facing the I in thinking.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. Again, Jeff, you said some wonderful things that I want to come back to. But the most important, for me at least, gift to this conversation was when you did this. It becomes so crystal clear. I mean, there is the mystical fact, the incarnation of the spirit into the soul, and it's we have the joy of being able to receive into us. It's like what comes from above, not just what comes from below. So when we see this sign, because it's like Plato's like the. Let me gather myself. Plato in Timaeus talks about the spirit first, the world spirit creating the world soul, and the world soul being crucified on the cross of the world. So this is way before. This is what is it? 400 years before Christ and the crucifixion. But he's using exactly the same imagery to what will be central to, it's like, Christianity, because this is a description of our true relationship to nature. And so when we see and experience ourselves as being at that intersect, and the freedom that it gives us and the obligations that it also gives us, and with Spinoza is also fascinating in this area about creating this intellectual freedom, and Spinoza will reflect on the fact that it's like the original word meaning of the word intellect is that part of the soul by which we can know God. That's the definition. It's got nothing to do with us, like our modern understanding of it. So we all have this soul capacity, but we must take, it's like, individual responsibility to cultivate that. And this is why the ethics is so important, because what is it that obscures our view from seeing what is the truth? So this whole, it's like, moral philosophy becomes, it's like, of an essential importance, and also helps us to understand when Steiner describes how, as we approach, it's like, as we proceed, like, along the initiatory path, then what happens is, it's like, we get a separation out of, it's like our thinking nature and our ability to feel as like what acts as will impulses in us, they begin to like distill themselves out. Although they all work in amongst each other, there's a clearer awareness of how they are distinct areas of our of our total experience. So I think it's important to bring this in as we proceed. We really wake up to, it's like our, again, waking up to our true nature. But so apart from the cross, which I'm going to take with me from this conversation, I'd like to add on another picture, which is to do with like this whole ethics question. One of the metaphors that Shakespeare uses, which I love, as he talks about the mind being a garden and the need to cultivate the garden and to pull out the weeds. So it's like those natural forces can like grow in us. So this is one of these images that I've used for a long time, which is why it's like 25 years ago, when I used to go back to visit my parents when I was studying, I'd more than happily go into the garden and go weeding. And my parents would go, "What on earth has happened to our son?" But it's turning that metaphor, it's like that you're understanding at a more deeper level into actual, it's like a physical action. And there are just so many beautiful metaphors out there, and I think this is why it's like literature, being able to talk around literature and discover the ideas that's like a below the surface of the story is one of the really powerful ways of being able to discover our human nature. Scientific notions doesn't allow us to take ourselves apart in that way, but when we begin to talk about literature, especially great works of literature, we can identify with what is happening and the questions that are being asked, and the situations that are people in, that allow us to ask deeper questions about ourselves. Yeah.
Well, any talk of the soul brings up psychology for me, and we're reading Esoteric Science, Outline of Esoteric Science, or mine is called An Outline of Spiritual Science, and I like that translation better.
Yeah.
And any psychology would be necessarily a spiritual science. It would have to be, otherwise, the way in which the soul is coming into the world cannot be seen. We're only in a funhouse of mirrors if we're thinking about, if we're not entering that, that moment that Plotinus talks about being removed from the parent and from the child being removed. That's a necessary moment,
Yeah.
of the consciousness soul, right? And I'm trying to get to this, which is that that the Greeks say had a picture that runs right through Plato, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, of what the human soul is, and psychology would do well just to look at what was revealed through the initiation processes out of the mystery schools, because that's where the soul was essentially born as an independent entity, as logos. We haven't touched upon the logos in this. He begins with, I believe it's Philo, and talks about the way in which the logos is the intermediary between the spiritually eternal and the physically manifest, and that right, and so then it becomes the vessel for that which is spiritual becoming physical, and which is why I again I love Michael Levin's work, and why look at biology in relationship to psychology, but not causative, because it's
Yeah.
backwards. It's backwards. It starts with the pre-propositional, and And so when reading esoteric science this time, I'm struck by the fact that this is what psychology should do. And it properly done, and I see it in impulse. I see the impulse in John Vervaeke particularly right now. What psychology can do will need also to explain the cosmos in relationship to the individual and the social spheres as relates to the individual. And so what Steiner does is moves into the inner workings of the of and the generative aspects of what it is to be a soul bearing human being with a physical body, and then pulls out and gives you a cosmological picture of which there's a reciprocal determination occurring, and makes the connection meaningful for himself, obviously,
Yeah.
but but is inscribing it or in indicating it so that you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it think. He said to Alex, which I thought was good.
Lead a horse to a library you can't force it to read.
Right, exactly. These sort of things.
Yeah.
Anyway, that this is a process of scientific inquiry that we're doing, I'm more and more reminded of that, and that somebody said, Paul Klingsnorth, one of the converts from natural science perspective to Christianity, is Orthodox Christian, and he wrote an article in which he's talking about Ahriman, because people kept saying to him, because he's talking about the technologies
Yeah.
being more and more vessels for a real body to live in, a real personage to live in a certain sense. There's a lot there. And anyway,
Yeah.
he says, and I was asked by Jonathan Rowson in a chat group, you understand Steiner? What is Ahriman being incarnating into technology, and is he the god of technology, so to speak? And that's not enough to explain Ahriman. It's a version of an explanation that is, well, it's propositional, but Ahriman is a being that is underlying the very generative aspects of that which is the obscuring dung that you were describing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I need to recapture where I was. So Klingsnorth says that Steiner created a pseudo religion called anthroposophy, and we know this to be. I'm glad he considered Steiner, but he too little considered Steiner to make such a statement, because what Steiner's saying in his Christology is that's the end of religion. Right? So
Exactly.
anthroposophy is not a new religion. It's not seeking to be a new religion. It's seeking to metamorphose natural science into a spiritual science available to all. It's not a cult. It's not a sect. It is that which is inherently wise within the human being as distillate of the cosmic wisdom.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what this chapter is about, and that's what the pagans understood, and that's how they in a sense are still running through Christianity, if you can deal with it as an esoteric fact.
So interesting. Just comment on what that guy said, and then I want to come back to the Ahriman thing, because you said something interesting and something that's also like resonated particularly strongly with me, having listened to Steiner's biography. It's like listening to the story of his life, and it's like how he's like describes how his different steps. It's really interesting. But the guy that you mentioned, whose name I've already forgotten, not Klinsmann, but
Klingsnorth, I believe.
Klingsnorth. We all make mistakes. That's part of being human, and that's part of how we learn, and I'm going to make a lot more mistakes before I die. I know that. The dangers is that this guy, it's like he is, or if people read him as an authority rather than this is just the opinion of a poorly informed person, then this is like the potential problem. So it's this problematic issue. Each and every one of us has to make this journey, and each and every one of us is going to make mistakes, and we're going to sow it's like all types of mayhem. It's like along the way, because if I'm an influential person and I say something crap like this guy just said, and it's like my followers, they sort of like say, oh well, he's an authority, he's an expert, even better, and he's probably taken time to investigate this, and therefore I can rely on the authority of his judgments, and he'll have barred the way if people can't move beyond like recognizing this is the opinion of an individual, just like yours and I's are opinions here. Hopefully, it's like more informed. But this is the reality of life, but that we're all caught up in this. It's like evolution of understanding, of waking up to ourselves. And then you begin to like think, God blimey, karmically, how are you going to get all of that sorted out in the future? You realise you're going to have to come back a few times. But that was just a reflection of what you were saying about this guy, that we have to recognise we all make mistakes. It's the stupid people that don't learn from the mistakes, and those are the people that we have to avoid, or people who aren't prepared to recognise when it's like made obvious to them that's like, here you need to inform yourself a little bit better. But the Ahriman question is a really interesting question, and I'd like to describe it like this, and this is in no way meant to be like a complete description, but it's one that it's like resonates with what I wanted to add to this conversation anyway. Goethe, why did he investigate light? Or what? Sorry, let's see. What is colour to Goethe? Colour is the deeds of light. It's the actions, it's the manifestations of life. Light is always invisible until things get in its way. And then it becomes, it's like an action of light. And this is at the heart of why Steiner and Goethe attach, and especially Steiner attaches so much importance to this, to Goethe's theory of colour, because Goethe wasn't happy with all the scientific experiments that are going on. He understood them as just like, it's like experiments to confirm facts that were already known about light, rather than actually investigating what is this light and what happens if we pass it through this type of filter. What happens if we refract it at these different angles? What happens if we merge them? It's like really playing with light as a force, as an energy, and then seeing the deeds of light, and then coming to a completely different, non-contradictory compared to Newton. It's like understanding of what light is, and something that aesthetically, like artists are like, will gravitate towards immediately, because there's a sense of wholeness and relationship to the feeling life that can happen there. So using this colour are the deeds of light, what is technology? Technology is the deeds of Ahriman. So all the moral questions that's like evolved from that, they are deeply interesting and deeply important. But without Ahriman, you and I wouldn't be able to have this conversation. We're 4,000 miles apart in different time zones, and it would have cost us an arm and a leg. Ahriman has blessed us with so many things. But there are other things that aren't blessings that come with that package, and this is this dual nature of Ahriman that we've got to filter out what is good and useful, and use that for supporting humanity, for recognizing, spreading a better a more complete understanding of what the Christ impulse is. This is all happening thanks to Ahriman here. It's like in our particular conversation and in other spheres as well. So we can't. Unfortunately, it's like anthroposophists. I don't know if they still do this, but when I first came across anthroposophy, I was deeply aware that there was this everything Ahrimanic is evil, but knowing, because I'd read it myself, that Steiner says sort of like no, this isn't. Was this like Christopher versus Luciferus? It's like Christ is the true Lucifer. This idea is like Lucifer has given us. It's like has enriched our lives, but it's a package that comes with so like a light side and a dark side. Ahriman is a package that comes with a light side and a dark side, and in actual fact, it's exactly like you're saying. It depends which souls. It's like this impulse, this spiritual impulse, lands in as to whether it's going to be something that is destructive towards humanity, or something that actually can be part of uniting humanity and helping humanity rediscover its humaneness.
Yeah, this is why I'm very encouraged by this movement that's happening in this space that we're in and referring to, that that there's a rejuvenation, a resurrection of what Christianity is, based on actual experience and actual epistemological processes by these individuals who are willing to embark on it. And many of them have exhausted the possibilities of the what soul nutrition that a natural scientific presumptive paradigmatic mind can provide for. And so we have this this rebirth in a way possible. And I see particularly Jordan Hall as hopeful, because he's not necessarily aligning himself with the as Pajot does with Eastern Orthodoxy, or Klingsnorth does with some sort of Orthodoxy. I'm not sure which. But those are indications, right? That that you need a community, right? You can't just do it meditating in your room. That community is extraordinarily important. But this gives me great hope that what you were saying about the Ahrimanic, you could say, perhaps, maybe this is a provisional theory, that we wouldn't have, it wasn't for Ahriman, we wouldn't be grounded in the world, right? We wouldn't have a place to inhabit, a body that was physiologically available to transform. Like we wouldn't have a soul in relationship to that body that we transform in order to descend into that body freely, right? We wouldn't have Michael Levin, even, I would say, giving us a holographic picture of the nature of existence at the cellular level. Like, these are all opportunities to inhabit the place between the mediating factor, the logos, that is between the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic, not allowing them one to hold sway or the other to hold sway, because if one holds sway, then they meet, and that's where true evil happens in the world, is where they're entwined without a mediating factor. And so this is the reason why I'm saying this, is that the ideas associated with somebody who's moving beyond the natural scientific paradigmatic mind has to deal with the primary aspect of the subjective self, not the secondary aspect of the subjective self. They're talking about what we've been talking about here, experience and faith. And matter of fact, Jordan Hall turns the propositional on its head, basically, and says it all begins with faith and hope, right? And then joy, and then understanding, and then we make propositional statements. And if things run in that direction, the propositional won't result in behaviorism. It'll result in being reciprocally informed by that which we are proposing to occur. Just like Ahriman is allowed, is sort of forecasted our physicality so that we can inhabit it. So do we forecast into our soul a body that a readiness for us to inhabit it.
Seeing as you just said it there, I'm going to have to. I want to read that. I want to find that quote about, because you mentioned joy there. I want to wrap up. I want to find that Spinoza quote that sort of like blew my mind earlier this week, because it felt so relevant to what you were saying there. Let me just find it on my computer. Hopefully, I'm looking for. So I can give a little bit of background. So Spinoza wrote the Ethics, but he also wrote. He did like a prologue, which was called "On the Improvement of the Intellect." It's this really interesting book, and it's the closest he comes to actually. Perhaps it's the closest he comes. I found it. Good. It's the closest he comes to a little bit of like autobiographical. But he's also quite clearly, when you read this, he's had some type of experience. And when I read this, I didn't know anything about Philo of Alexandria, but something has completely changed his mind, where he said it's like family business. Yeah, it's important to do that, but there are some things that are more important in life and all these type of things. And so I'll just finish off with this beautiful Spinoza quote from "On the Improvement of the Intellect." "But love towards a thing eternal and infinite feeds the mind wholly with joy, and is itself unmingled with any sadness. Wherefore it is greatly to be desired and sought for with all our strength."
Beautiful. Perfect.